What's up everyone, welcome to HiFi Turtle. I'm back again at Schroeder Amplification here in Highland Park, Illinois. This time we're checking out a very hyped product. This is the Rose 150B streamer, DAC, and preamp. When I first saw the Rose products, I just thought they were a streamer or a high-end music server. I was kind of like, whatever. But there's so much more than that. Like I said, this is a streamer, DAC, and preamp. And it has so many features in it. Some of them are cool and admittedly a little gimmicky, but others are extremely useful and beyond even higher end products that I'm familiar with. I think it's really awesome. It's worth talking about. So let's talk about the Rose 150B DAC, streamer, and preamp. Stay tuned. So like I said, the Rose RS150B is a DAC, network, streamer, preamp, but I forgot one thing about it. It's also a music server, or it could be. There's an optional storage for SSD, and this is really awesome because they just put this little plate at the bottom of the component, and you can just slap whatever SSD you want right in there. It's incredibly user-friendly, incredibly well-designed. It's no BS, so you don't have to open up the case, you don't have to ship it to the manufacturer and get something soldered onto the board. Just slap in whatever SSD you feel like using. And that's really awesome. You can also stick a USB drive in here or even a micro SD card and also play music off of that. So this is a really nicely designed, user-friendly, fully featured device, all for $5,000. Now, one thing I want to clear up really quickly is that if you go to Rose's website or read forums elsewhere, you may notice that there is an RS150 and an RS150B. In this case, I'm talking about the 150B. The reason why there is a 150B is because the original 150 used an AKM chip for its DAC, and unfortunately AKM had a large fire and shut down their facility for a period of time. So the RS150B uses an ESS DAC chip instead of the AKM. Even though AKM has now recovered from the fire, Rose has said that there is no plans to again use the AKM chip within the 150. So beyond all the physical features this component has, it has an incredible array of software features, including a wide array of filters, upsampling, including support for MQA unfolding, DSD, and a myriad of other options. It does come with a remote, but you can also use your phone as a remote for this device. The app itself is extraordinarily robust. It has a home page where it will suggest playlists and tracks that are in Qobuz or Tidal, or things picked by the Rose developers and team themselves. There's a radio function. This isn't a true AM/FM tuner. It is internet radio, so your favorite station may not be on the frequency band that you're thinking of. But it is a pretty cool feature, and the screen itself turns to an AM/FM kind of tuner look, which is pretty sweet. And then you have this extraordinarily long list of options that you can select from. I didn't go through all these menus, but there are just so many different options and features. You could really spend hours going through all these. And then the app itself does serve as a remote to the device, which it's actually extremely robust, and it gives you a lot of nice features just on the home screen of the remote. There are also panels where you can dial in deeper and set settings such as input output, the VU meters. And the one criticism I do have about the VU meters is that the descriptions themselves leave a little bit to be desired. It's not really straightforward what type A, B, C, D, E, F really is, unless you're very familiar with it. And I'm not a lawyer, but I probably would change the name from Macintosh type VU meter. But overall, the app itself is extremely robust, didn't have any problems with it. It looks very modern, and it is kind of a Roon competitor in a way. Currently, the app supports Qobuz, Tidal, and Spotify Connect, and there may be more coming down the road. I saw some posts on the Rose user forum asking for Amazon HiFi and others. And both the application and the touchscreen of the device were extremely responsive. I've seen a lot of other high-end audio products that offer touchscreens or offer an application, and it's buggy or glitchy or slow or just feels congested. This is extremely competently built. One small thing to note about the streaming though is that you either have to have an Ethernet cord or a wireless connection, of course, but the wireless connection, you need a USB dongle in order to support Wi-Fi, which is not included with the device. Another application that's on here is RoseTube, and it is YouTube, but I guess a modified version to work on the Rose products. It also doesn't have ads, so that's kind of cool as well. You can project this to a TV using an HDMI display. The screen itself isn't bad. At this price and size, I would not expect to see an OLED display. It's an LCD display. It's an okay LCD. It has a little bit of bleed. It has the problems with colors that LCDs just have, but overall, I think it's fine. For the majority of my listening, I used the apodizing hybrid roll-off filter. There are several other filters that you can set. You can also do upsampling. While this device does support DSD and DXD and also DSD upsampling, I did not do any upsampling. The default filter is the minimum phase slow roll-off, which I thought was a little bit warm, and personally for my taste, a little bit too warm. I like a more accurate sound, so the apodizing hybrid roll-off was more to my liking. And being that this is a computer-like device, it's going to continue to get software updates, firmware updates, so there may be additional filters and additional streaming services and additional features that this will support. I also use this device as both a DAC and preamp because I don't have a dedicated preamp currently. There are two things to note about that. First is that if you are not using an external preamp, the VU meters will, well, they work, but not really because they don't move with the music. You have to turn off the volume control in order to have the VU meters go. The second thing is you also have the ability to change the output voltage, and this is a wide array of voltages you can select. I believe the lowest was 100 millivolts and it went all the way up to 6, and it wasn't like 4 different options for the output voltage. I think there were over a dozen output voltages, and in fact when you select those output voltages, it will tell you what the difference is if you're running an unbalanced connection, because the voltage outgoing is less if you use the unbalanced connection. So what we're talking about sound-wise, when I was at Tim's showroom listening to the Vigintis with the Bat Electronics, we switched to a Bryston DAC to see the difference, and it was very apparent immediately the differences that the Rose had to the Bryston. The Bryston was much more forward. It was a little bit punchier in the bass, but overall the presentation, I much preferred the Rose. The Rose allowed the Vigintis to image spectacularly to the point where you really can't tell where those speakers are in the room, and you almost kind of forget that they're there, which is really strange to say because each of those speakers is 255 pounds. They are absolutely gigantic, and it's impossible to miss if you walked into the room. But just listening to the music in that moment, they really did disappear. Whereas on the Bryston, it was more forward, more easily identifiable where the speakers were and that, yes, in fact, they were in the room. And based on the sound characteristic I heard between the switch, I thought that the Rose 150B would be closer to the DCS Bartok than my benchmark at home, which got me really curious. So Tim let me take the RS150B home, and I plugged it in and compared it to my benchmark DAC3L. What really surprised me is the differences between the two were extremely slight, at least on the apodizing hybrid roll-off filter. So very much like the Bartok, the Rose itself had a extremely deep soundstage, a very wide soundstage, not as wide or as expansive as the Bartok to where I was absolutely floored and blown away, but definitely more expansive and deep than the benchmark itself. I didn't feel like it was more forward than the benchmark, but definitely a wider and deeper soundstage. I think bass notes themselves had less attack on the 150B over the benchmark. And that's not to say that it sounded worse in that regard. It just means that there's a tonality difference between the two in that regard. Mid-range was really smooth. I felt like it was extremely close between the two, maybe a little bit more realistic on the 150B, but again, very close. And then the treble itself, I felt like there was really absolutely no difference between the two. It was the same treble attack, same decay, it was just extremely good. And the benchmark, like I said before, is an extremely good DAC. So the Rose to be compared to the benchmark is an absolute compliment. So the Rose as a standalone piece, DAC, preamp, extremely resolving, great soundstage and depth, very neutral characteristic, very true and accurate characteristics. But I think it strikes a very good balance, taking some soundstage characteristics that are, in a way, more so like the Bartok that I heard, while still maintaining the tonality characteristics of the DAC3L. So like I said, this is a $5,000 device, and I would say it does straddle the fence and sit in between the Bartok and the benchmark. Of course, it is more like the DAC3L than the Bartok, but again, even between the Bartok and the Rose, there's still an $11,000 difference. I think some people might look at this and say, well, I'm just gonna buy the DAC3L and forget about the Rose. If it's that close sound-wise and they're very similar, why the heck would I want to spend an additional $3,000 to get the 150B? I would say the 150B has an extremely long list of features and additional options that you are not going to get with the DAC3L. On the DAC3L, it is a very simple device. And if you just want a simple DAC, sure, the benchmark is an incredible device. You could go out and buy it and just use it as a DAC. But the 150B is so much more than just a DAC. You have the DAC itself, the preamp section, the network streamer, the Roon-like app, the Rose tube, internet radio. You can put a micro SD or a USB drive in and listen to your music off of that. You can attach an SSD filled with music. Customizable VU meters, time, weather, date. And you might say, well, why VU meters? They're absolutely useless. Because they're cool. Because they're cool, okay? It's VU meters, it's HiFi, it's cool. There are so many different features and devices where this one box checks so many. If you wanted all the features that the Rose does, you'd have to have probably 4 or 5 different boxes. And on top of that, a few other subscriptions to things as well. Plus, like I said, this thing is going to get firmware and software updates. It's going to add additional features over the lifetime of the product. It can only get better from here. It is a really cool device. I highly recommend you check it out. And if you're on the fence about it or have a lot of questions, like I said, there's still that user forum. You don't have to be an owner to get into the user forum. You can create an account, go online and start asking questions or start seeing if the Rose really makes sense for you. There's a bunch of owners, there's Rose themselves, and they have that kind of connection, support, and community also in itself presents a value proposition. So I'm happy to recommend the Rose. Big thanks to Tim for letting me check this thing out. Really cool. Tim's always on the cutting edge of what's extremely cool in hi-fi, so make sure you check out his shop. If you do talk to him, visit his shop, whatever, make sure you tell him that I sent you. If you like this video, make sure you give it that thumbs up. Make sure you hit subscribe. Really helps me out. Check out the links below for other ways to help support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.